I was 78, written off as useless. Even my own daughter rolled her eyes when I walked into the courtroom that morning. To her, I was just an old man too stubborn to let go of a house she and her husband already considered theirs. But what she didn't know was that I carried a story far heavier than the years on my back. My name is Henry Callahan. I spent 40 years running into burning buildings when everyone else was running out. I don't say that for praise. Firefighters don't live on applause. We live on seconds, on instincts, on choices that mean someone gets to see another sunrise. When I retired, I thought I'd earned the right to fade quietly into my own life, to drink my coffee from the chipped mug my late wife loved, and to tend the roses she planted by the porch. Emily, my only daughter, didn't see it that way. To her and her husband Ryan, I was no longer the man who had raised her, but a problem to be managed. They told me the house was too much for me, that I needed community care, words that sounded helpful but carried the sting of eviction. Each Sunday dinner turned into a subtle interrogation. Was I eating enough? Did I forget the stove? Had I misplaced the bills? They weren't checking on me. They were building a case. The worst part, Emily didn't even look me in the eye anymore. She'd sit across the table scrolling her phone, letting Ryan do most of the talking. He was smooth, I'll give him that, always polite, always smiling. But his eyes gave him away, sharp, calculating, already measuring the walls as if they were his. That Thursday, I set the table with care. Chicken and dumplings, just like Margaret, my wife, used to make. Fresh flowers in the center, the old embroidered cloth Emily had once admired. I thought maybe, just maybe, she'd remember this house wasn't just lumber and nails. It was a lifetime. They arrived late. Ryan brushed past me like he owned the place, settling into Margaret's armchair with the remote in his hand. Emily didn't kiss my cheek. She just stood there in a green dress I recognized. I'd bought it for her birthday years ago, and said in a clipped tone, "Dad, we need to talk." What followed didn't feel like a conversation. It felt like a verdict. They had found a retirement community for me. They had already spoken to the staff. My room was waiting, I tried to argue. This is the house where your mother took her last breath. The house where you learned to ride your bike in the driveway. The place I carried you back to after your first school play when you cried because you thought you'd failed. You call it too big? I call it home. Emily wouldn't meet my eyes.
Ryan smirked.
Memories aren't on walls, Henry. They're in the heart. Be reasonable. Sign the papers. Let us handle things, the papers. That was when I realized this wasn't concern. This was theft dressed as love. A lawyer's letter lay folded on the table, and my daughter's silence spoke louder than any signature. I didn't sign. My hand trembled, but I pushed the papers back across the table. Not today. Ryan's mask cracked for the first time. His smile thinned. Then tomorrow. You don't have much of a choice. That night, the house felt colder than it ever had, though every window was shut. I sat in Margaret's chair, staring at the walls we had painted together, the photographs that lined the hallway, the memories they wanted to box up and sell. For the first time in my life, I wondered if I truly was powerless, an old man waiting for others to decide when his story ended. But as the clock ticked past midnight, something inside me refused to surrender. They thought I was finished. They thought age meant weakness. They had no idea what I still carried with me, and they were about to find out. The next time Emily and Ryan came over, they didn't bother with pleasantries. No casserole dishes, no small talk about the weather. Just a brief knock, and then Ryan's shoes dragging across my hardwood floor. He had a manila folder under his arm, and Emily trailed behind him like a shadow, her eyes locked on the floorboards. I had cooked again, out of habit, more than hope. Roast beef, potatoes, gravy, the kind of meal Emily used to ask for on her birthdays. The table was set, candles lit, but when they sat down, neither of them touched a plate. Ryan cleared his throat, spreading out the papers with a salesman's confidence. "Henry, we're here to make this official. The transfer of property has been drawn up. All that's missing is your signature." I didn't even glance at the text. I could already feel the trap tightening. "You're moving fast." I said quietly. Because it's in your best interest, he replied, his voice polished like a lawyer's script. You can't maintain this place alone. Emily and I will take care of everything. Think of it as a gift, a gift. My house, my memories, my life, packaged as generosity. Emily finally looked up, her eyes glassy. Dad, please don't make this harder. You'll be safer at Riverview. They have nurses on duty, activities, people your age. Her voice cracked halfway through, but she steadied it like she'd rehearsed the lines. I noticed her hands twisting in her lap, knuckles white. I pushed the papers back toward Ryan. This isn't about safety. This is about control. And you know it, his smile faltered. Henry, refusing doesn't make sense. You've already had slips, leaving the stove on, forgetting bills. That's a lie, I snapped before I realized I'd raised my voice. You know it, and so does she. Emily flinched, and for a split second I saw the girl I raised, the one who used to run to me after nightmares, the one who once believed her father could fix anything. But then Ryan's hand landed on hers, and the softness vanished. Listen, Ryan said, leaning forward, his voice dropping low. If you won't sign today, we can take another route. There are legal avenues, mental capacity hearings. Judges don't side with men your age, Henry. Think carefully. The way he said my name, flat, dismissive, made my blood burn. I stood up slowly, steadying myself on the edge of the table. This is my home. I built this life with my own hands, and I won't be shoved out like a guest who's overstayed his welcome. Ryan's eyes narrowed. You think stubbornness makes you strong? It makes you vulnerable. Courts eat men like you alive. I leaned closer, lowering my voice until it was almost a whisper. Maybe, or maybe you've forgotten that I spent a lifetime walking into fire while men like you ran from smoke. For the first time, his confidence cracked. Just a flicker, but I saw it. Emily stood abruptly, pushing her chair back with a scrape. We'll come back, she said, her tone clipped final. She gathered her coat without touching the food I had made and walked to the door. Ryan followed, but not before leaning close enough for me to smell the cologne sharp on his collar. You have a week, he muttered. After that I won't ask. The door shut hard enough to rattle the frames on the wall. I sank back into Margaret's chair, the silence pressing against me like a second skin. The candles flickered out on the table, smoke curling into the air, and I stared at the plates of untouched food until the gravy turned cold. A week. That was all they were giving me. 7 days to surrender everything I had left. But as I sat there in the dim light, my eyes fell on the old desk in the corner, the one I hadn't opened since Margaret's death. Something in me stirred, faint but insistent. If Brian thought he could corner me, he'd forgotten one thing. Fires don't scare a man who's already walked through them. That night, sleep refused to come. I sat in Margaret's old armchair with the house creaking around me like it, too, was holding its breath. The clock ticked steady, louder with each pass of the second hand. Outside, a drizzle tapped against the window, soft but relentless, a week. Ryan's words rang in my head like a countdown. 7 days until strangers boxed up my life. 7 days until my daughter's signature erased me from my own home. I closed my eyes, trying to picture Margaret's face, the way she used to smile at me when I came home with smoke still clinging to my clothes. She always said I carried the fire inside me, that it was both my strength and my curse. Tonight, it felt like the last ember was fading. I wandered the house in silence, touching the walls we had painted together, the photographs along the hallway, Emily's baby picture, her first steps in this very living room, the holiday dinners, the laughter, the burnt pies that became family jokes. They wanted me to believe memories could be stuffed into boxes, traded for a key to a retirement community. But these walls weren't just wood and plaster. They were stitched with every sacrifice Margaret and I had made. My steps carried me into the study, a room I hadn't lingered in for years. Margaret used to call it Henry's bunker. The desk was still there, scarred with rings from my coffee cups, drawers stuffed with old bills and manuals from the firehouse. I pulled the top drawer open and shuffled through faded papers. Nothing but reminders of a life already lived. But then, beneath a stack of envelopes, I found a small brass key. It was wedged between old tax receipts nearly forgotten. My chest tightened. I knew this key. Margaret had once teased me about it. "Harold left you puzzles," she'd said, half smiling, as she tucked it back in the drawer. I never asked what she meant. I scanned the desk until my eyes landed on the bottom drawer, the one that had always resisted opening. The lock was small, barely noticeable. My hands shook as I slid the key in and turned. The click echoed louder than it should have. Inside was a folder, thick and heavy, bound in twine. On the corner, in neat handwriting, were 2 words, "For Henry." I sat back in the chair, heart pounding. The folder smelled faintly of old paper and dust, but something about it felt alive, like it had been waiting for me. I loosened the twine and pulled out the first page. It wasn't a bill. It wasn't a manual. It was a will, dated 6 months before Margaret died. My breath caught in my throat. I flipped through page after page, eyes scanning lines I barely understood. Properties, stocks, bank accounts, numbers I hadn't seen in a lifetime of paychecks. And then a clause that made my hands go numb. Everything was left to me. Every cent, every brick, every acre. Emily would only inherit if she treated me with respect and care. And Ryan, his name was nowhere to be found. At the bottom was a letter. Margaret's handwriting shaky but unmistakable. "Henry, if you're reading this, you've been backed into a corner. I knew this day might come. Ryan's charm is a mask, and Emily is blind to it. This is your shield. Use it not to wound, but to protect. Stand tall, my love. You've walked through fire before. You can do it again." The room blurred through the tears I didn't even feel rolling down my face. All those nights I thought Margaret was resting quietly. She had been planning, protecting, leaving me a weapon disguised as paper. I set the letter down, the weight of it heavier than any hose I'd ever carried into a blaze. For the first time in days, my chest filled with something other than dread. Ryan thought he had cornered me. Emily thought I was powerless. They were about to learn that the fire inside me wasn't out yet. Morning light spilled through the curtains, but I hadn't slept. The folder lay open on my desk, pages fanned out like evidence in a trial. The numbers were staggering: stocks, rental properties, accounts I never knew existed. Margaret had left behind more than security. She had built an empire in silence. I ran my hand over the documents, still half in disbelief. For decades, I thought my wife had been content with simple living. She clipped coupons, stretched every dollar, made old furniture shine like new. But behind that quiet discipline, she had been weaving a safety net strong enough to catch me when I fell. The more I read, the clearer it became. She hadn't trusted Ryan from the start. Her clauses weren't just legal jargon. They were warnings, shields disguised as ink. Respect your father or lose everything. Margaret must have seen something in him long before Emily ever brought him home for dinner. I pulled out the bank statements. Month after month of rent deposits. The building address froze me. It was the same one Emily and Ryan lived in. They thought they were paying a landlord across town, but the money had been flowing straight into an account Margaret set up in my name. My lips curled into something I hadn't felt in a long time, a smile. I leaned back, remembering the smug way Ryan had lectured me about being practical, about how I couldn't keep up with responsibilities anymore. The irony nearly choked me. He had been living under my roof without even knowing it. Tucked in the back of the folder was another letter, shorter than the first. Margaret's handwriting again, sharp despite her failing health. "Henry, I know you'll want to forgive too quickly. Don't. Make them understand the weight of their choices. You taught men to respect fire by showing its power. Teach Emily to respect family the same way." Her words cut deep. Forgiveness had always been my instinct. In the firehouse, grudges burned out quickly. Life was too short when every call could be your last. But this wasn't smoke or flames. This was betrayal in my own bloodline. I spent the next hours reading everything twice, then a third time, until the meaning settled like stone. I wasn't a powerless old man waiting to be pushed aside. I was the legal owner of more than they could ever imagine. The phone rang once that afternoon. Emily. I let it go to voicemail. Her voice was soft, cautious. "Dad, Ryan thinks we should come by tomorrow, just to talk things through." The old me might have softened at that tone, but not anymore. I knew Ryan had fed her the words. I sat there, staring at the receiver long after the message ended. A part of me longed to hear my daughter speak to me like she used to, warm, trusting, uncoached. But that voice was buried under Ryan's poison. By nightfall, I had made my decision. The next time they stepped into my house with their movers and their false smiles, they wouldn't be facing the weary man they thought they had broken. They would be facing the man Margaret had prepared me to be. The man who still carried fire in his veins. I gathered the documents, tucked them neatly back into the folder, and placed it on the desk where it would be impossible to miss. When they came, I wanted them to see it, to feel the shift in the air, because once they realized what those pages meant, nothing would ever be the same. The next morning, I was ready before the sun. I shaved, put on my pressed shirt, and brewed a pot of coffee strong enough to keep my hands steady. The folder lay on the desk in plain sight. Margaret's handwriting on the cover seemed to whisper, "Stand tall." At exactly 9, their car pulled into the driveway. Through the window, I watched Ryan straighten his tie like a man about to close a deal. Emily followed behind, head down, clutching her purse, as if it carried courage she didn't have. They entered without knocking. Ryan spoke first. "Henry, the movers are scheduled for noon. Let's not drag this out." I gestured to the desk. "Before you move anything, you should take a look at this." Ryan frowned, but curiosity pulled him closer. He untied the folder and scanned the first page. His smirk faltered. The color drained from his face as he flipped to the next sheet, then the next. "What is this?" He muttered. "Legal records," I said, calm as the steam rising from my mug. "Deeds, statements, a will." "Everything Margaret left me." Emily stepped forward, her eyes darting across the documents. She whispered almost to herself, "Dad, you own the building." "Our building?" I nodded. "Every rent check you've written has gone straight to me. You've been living under my roof all along." Ryan slammed the folder shut, his composure cracking. "This doesn't change anything. You're old, Henry. Courts don't side with men your age." I leaned forward. "Courts side with facts. And these papers are facts. Try me." For a moment, silence filled the room. Emily's breathing was shallow, her face pale. Ryan was pacing, pulling at his tie, as if it had turned into a noose. "Even if it's true," he said, voice rising, "you wouldn't dare put your own daughter on the street. That would make you a monster." I held his gaze. "You're right. I wouldn't. But you came here ready to make me homeless. So tell me, who's the monster?" Emily flinched as if struck. Tears welled in her eyes, but Ryan's hand on her shoulder stiffened her spine. He whispered something I couldn't catch, and she nodded reluctantly. Then she spoke, her voice trembling. "Dad, I'm pregnant." The words hit me harder than any fire hose ever had. My knees nearly buckled, but I gripped the desk. A grandchild. The news should have been joy, but in her mouth it sounded like a weapon. Ryan seized the moment. "See, you wouldn't throw out the mother of your grandchild. Not if you have a shred of decency left." I studied Emily's face. Her tears were real, but her eyes, those were pleading with me not to give in, not to hand Ryan another victory. I set my mug down and straightened my shoulders. "Congratulations, Emily, but don't mistake my love for weakness. This house, this legacy, it doesn't belong to Ryan, and it won't be used to chain me down." Ryan's jaw clenched. "You're bluffing." "You don't have the stomach for this fight." I picked up the folder and tapped it once against the desk. "Try me. You've got 30 days to find somewhere else to live. After that, the law will do what I don't need to." Emily gasped. Ryan's face twisted in rage. He leaned across the desk until his breath was hot on my face. "If you think this ends here, old man, you're mistaken. I'll bury you in court." I didn't flinch. "Then I'll see you there." For the first time since Margaret's funeral, I felt alive. Not because I had won, but because I had stopped surrendering. And deep down, I knew this battle was only beginning. The courthouse smelled of polished wood and old paper. I'd walked into burning buildings without hesitation, but that morning my palms were damp. Not from fear of fire, fear of betrayal. My own daughter sat 2 benches away, eyes fixed on the floor, her hands folded over her growing belly. Ryan was beside her, whispering into her ear like a snake coiling tighter around its prey. Their lawyer rose first. Smooth suit, slick words. He painted me as a stubborn old man clinging to a house he couldn't manage, manipulating my daughter, isolating her from her husband. He used words like incapacity and unfit, each one a match struck against my dignity. I kept my eyes on the judge. He looked down from the bench, calm but sharp, the kind of man who measured before he cut. His nameplate read, Judge Whitmore. When my turn came, my attorney laid out the folder Margaret had left me. Deeds, bank statements, letters. Every sheet was placed on the table with precision, each one louder than any speech. Ryan scoffed, shaking his head as if the evidence was nothing but smoke. Fabrications, he hissed, loud enough for the courtroom to hear. The judge lifted a document, adjusted his glasses, and studied it for a long moment. Then his eyes flicked up and locked onto me. For a heartbeat, the courtroom disappeared. Mr. Callahan, he said slowly, do you remember the summer of 1972? The question knocked the air out of me. Yes, Your Honor, I said, unsure where he was going. His voice softened. There was a fire on Maple Street, an apartment complex. I was 12 years old. My mother was trapped inside. Memories surged back. The heat, the smoke, the terrified boy clinging to the sidewalk as I carried his mother down 3 flights of stairs. She had survived, barely. The judge's jaw tightened. It was you. You were the firefighter who saved her life. A ripple ran through the courtroom. The lawyers froze, pens paused mid-note. Emily turned her head sharply, eyes wide. Ryan's smug grin slipped for the first time. The judge removed his glasses, his voice steady but heavy with memory. I never forgot that night. I never forgot the man who told me, don't be afraid, son. Your mother's coming with me. That man was you. Silence. Heavy, unshakable silence. Ryan's lawyer leapt to his feet. Your Honor, this is irrelevant. Surely a conflict of interest. But the judge's gavel cracked once. Sit down. His eyes never left mine. This court does not forget courage, nor does it tolerate deceit. He turned a page of the will. And the evidence is clear. Mr. Callahan is the rightful owner of all contested property. Furthermore, the claims of incapacity are unfounded and malicious. Ryan's face reddened, veins straining at his temples. He leaned toward Emily, whispering frantically. She shook her head, tears slipping down her cheeks. For once, she wasn't listening. The judge's voice cut through the air like an axe. Mr. Ryan Porter, your conduct amounts to coercion and attempted exploitation of an elder. This court will be referring the matter for investigation. Gasps filled the room. Ryan's head snapped toward me, fury blazing, but I sat still, hands folded, eyes steady. The gavel struck again. Case dismissed. Judgment in favor of Henry Callahan, Emily sobbed openly. Ryan cursed under his breath. And me? I sat there in silence, not triumphant, not gloating, but steady, as if Margaret's hand rested on my shoulder, reminding me this was never about revenge. It was about dignity, and though the verdict had been spoken, I knew Ryan wasn't finished. Men like him never walk away quietly. The trial was over, but Ryan's eyes burned into me as we left the courthouse. Emily walked a step behind him, her cheeks streaked with tears. I held the door open for her, and for the first time in months, she whispered, "Thank you, Dad." Her voice was small, but it was hers, not scripted by him. Ryan shoved past me, jaw clenched, muttering, "This isn't finished." He was right about one thing. Men like Ryan don't accept defeat, they unravel. By the following week, whispers had spread through Riverton. Neighbors who once greeted him with polite nods now crossed the street. Word of the judge's ruling had traveled fast, and so had the details. No one respects a man who tries to rob his own father-in-law. Then came the job. Ryan worked at a financial firm uptown, always bragging about his promotions and connections. I didn't need to make a call. The firm's partners read the court filings themselves. Exploiting an elder isn't good for business. One Monday morning, Emily told me, his desk was cleared out. No farewell party, no second chances. Just an escort to the door. At night, I heard shouting through the thin walls of their apartment in my building. Yes, my building. Tenants complained about noise, about Ryan slamming doors, about arguments spilling into the hallway. I warned him once, calmly, "Ryan, I own these walls. Test me again, and you'll be out in 30 days. He sneered, but I saw fear flicker in his eyes. Emily began stopping by my house more often. Sometimes with excuses, dropping off groceries, checking in. But really, I think she wanted space from him. We'd sit in the kitchen, sipping coffee, and I could almost see the little girl she used to be. She laughed nervously at first, then with more ease. Each smile was a crack in Ryan's grip, but cracks only make men like him more dangerous. One evening, just after sunset, there was a pounding at my door. When I opened it, Ryan stood there red-eyed, reeking of whiskey. His tie was loosened, his words slurred but sharp. "You think you've beaten me?" he spat. "You humiliated me in court, poisoned Emily against me, ruined my career. You stole everything." I kept my voice steady. "You did that to yourself." He lunged forward, shoving his finger into my chest. "You don't deserve any of it. You're just an old man waiting to die." Before I could answer, Emily appeared at the top of the stairs. "Ryan, stop!" she pleaded. Her voice shook, but she didn't move toward him. For once, she wasn't standing at his side. He turned, eyes wild. "You're with him now? After everything I've given you?" Emily's answer was quiet, but it cut deeper than any shout. "What you gave me was fear." Ryan's face twisted, fury and disbelief tangled together. He opened his mouth to strike back, but the words never came. Instead, he staggered down the steps, muttering curses into the night, his shadow shrinking as he disappeared into the street. I closed the door, my hands trembling only after it latched shut. Emily stood frozen, one hand on her belly, the other pressed to her lips. "Dad," she whispered, tears brimming again. "I think it's over." I wanted to believe her. But I knew Ryan, and I knew the fire in him hadn't burned out yet. It was only looking for another way to spread. Weeks passed before the house was quiet again. Ryan drifted out of Riverton the way smoke drifts from a dying fire, angry, directionless, leaving only a bitter smell behind. No more late-night pounding on doors. No more neighbors whispering about his outbursts. Just silence. Emily stayed. At first, it was awkward. She moved back into her old room, the one with faded posters still taped to the walls, and we circled each other like strangers. Breakfasts were filled with small talk about groceries, the weather, her morning sickness. But slowly a rhythm returned. She washed dishes without being asked, watered Margaret's violets by the window, even ironed my shirts the way her mother used to. Actions, not words, began to speak for her. One afternoon, as I was sorting through the last of Margaret's papers, Emily came to me with a small velvet pouch. Her hands shook as she held it out. "I took these when I thought Ryan was right." Inside were Margaret's wedding ring, her earrings, and the chain that had belonged to Emily's grandmother. She lowered her head. "I don't deserve forgiveness, but I want you to have these back." I took the pouch gently, the weight of it more memory than gold. "Forgiveness isn't a gift you earn," I said. "It's one you fight to live up to." Her eyes brimmed, but she nodded as if ready to do the work. As months rolled by, my granddaughter was born. Holding that tiny girl in my arms, I felt something shift inside me. Her name was Grace, and for the first time since Margaret's passing, hope didn't feel fragile. It felt alive, but Margaret's words haunted me still. "Don't just protect, teach." I realized what she meant the day an elderly neighbor knocked on my door. Her children were trying to force her into selling her house. She had heard what happened with me, and she whispered, "How did you stand up to them?" That was the moment I knew Margaret's legacy wasn't meant to end with me. With Emily's help, I used part of the inheritance to start a foundation, a place where older men and women could find legal aid, community and dignity when their own families turned cold. We called it Second Chance House. The name fit. Within a year, we'd helped a dozen people fight back against exploitation. I'd sit with them at the kitchen table, telling them the same thing I once had to remind myself: you're not powerless. Age doesn't erase your worth. Watching their eyes light up, I could almost hear Margaret laughing softly in the background. One summer afternoon, I stood on the porch as children played in the garden of the foundation's first house. Emily sat nearby, rocking Grace gently, sunlight in her hair. She looked at me and said, "Dad, you turned our worst days into someone else's hope." Mom would be proud. I didn't answer right away. I was watching Grace's tiny fingers curl around Emily's hand, watching the woman my daughter was becoming. Not the one Ryan had tried to shape, but the one Margaret and I had always known was there. Finally, I said, "Pride doesn't even cover it," that night. As the cicadas sang outside my window, I sat in my armchair with a cup of tea. Margaret's photo rested on the table beside me, her smile frozen in time, but her voice alive in every decision I'd made since. I wasn't the old man Ryan had called useless. I wasn't just a firefighter turned relic. I was a husband, a father, a grandfather, and now a guardian for others like me. The fire inside me hadn't gone out after all. It had simply changed shape, burning not to destroy, but to light the way.